The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Chad Daybell's property in Rexburg, Idaho. FBI agents and local police moved methodically across the yard, their eyes scanning the seemingly ordinary landscape. What appeared to be a simple pet cemetery, a patch of disturbed earth where a family might bury beloved hamsters or cats, had become the focal point of their grim search. Detective Ray Hermosillo noticed something unusual about the soil near a pond on the property. It was different somehow, darker, more recently disturbed. The cadaver dogs had alerted strongly to this spot. As the detective approached, the unmistakable scent of decomposition grew stronger, confirming his worst fears. "We need to focus here," he called to the forensic team. The excavation began carefully, methodically. Each layer of soil was removed with painstaking precision. 3 feet down, they encountered something that wasn't earth. Black plastic wrapped tightly around a small form. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Voices dropped to whispers. Every movement slowed as the reality of what they'd found sank in. As they continued to uncover the plastic, the unmistakable shape of a child emerged. JJ Vallow, still dressed in red pajamas, his small hands bound with duct tape, strips of the same silver tape covering his mouth. Despite months in the ground, his body was remarkably preserved, wrapped meticulously in layer upon layer of plastic. The officers, hardened by years on the force, struggled to maintain their composure. "We've got a positive ID," one officer radioed, voice thick with emotion. But the horror wasn't complete. Not far from JJ's grave, they discovered another site, this one bearing evidence of a far more brutal end. The partial remains of 16-year-old Tylee Ryan had been dismembered and burned beyond recognition, her body desecrated in a way that spoke of rage and desperation. The only parts left intact were her hands, severed as if the perpetrators had given up halfway through their gruesome task. Laboratory technicians would later find something the killers had overlooked: strands of Lori Vallow's hair caught in the plastic wrapping JJ's body, and Alex Cox's fingerprints pressed into the adhesive of the duct tape. Silent witnesses to an unspeakable crime. As the sun set over the property, casting blood-red light across what was now officially a crime scene, Detective Hermosillo stepped away to make a call. 2 families had been waiting months for news of their missing children. Now he had to tell them that their worst nightmares had been confirmed. Buried in a pet cemetery, wrapped in plastic, lay the remains of 2 innocent children, sacrificed to satisfy the apocalyptic delusions of those who should have protected them. The zombies had been found, and their discovery would unravel one of the most twisted murder cases in American criminal history. In the quiet town of Springville, beneath the watchful mountains of Utah, a boy named Chad Daybell entered the world on a warm August day in 1968. His childhood unfolded within the structured embrace of a devout Mormon household, ordinary in many ways, yet destined for extraordinary darkness. Chad's path seemed predictable at first. He walked the well-trodden road through Brigham Young University before answering the call to missionary work. For 2 long years, he carried his faith to the streets of New Jersey, spreading the word of salvation to souls he believed needed guidance. When his mission concluded, he returned to complete his education, emerging with a journalism degree clutched in hopeful hands. Life's next chapters seemed to follow a familiar script. At just 22, Chad married Tammy Douglas, and together they created a family of 5 children. He found work as a copy editor at the Standard Examiner in Ogden, but the modest salary forced him to seek additional income. By strange coincidence, or perhaps fate, Chad turned to the dead for his supplemental earnings, taking work as a gravedigger. The cemetery's silent residents spoke to something deep within him. Soon, he advanced to become a cemetery sexton for Springville, caring for the grounds where the departed rested. These quiet hours among tombstones awakened something in Chad, a fascination that would later consume him. His true passion, however, remained storytelling. Working with Cedar Fort Incorporated, he birthed his first novel, An Errand for Emma, a tale written by a Mormon for Mormons. The written word called to him so powerfully that he eventually left his position among the graves to chase his literary dreams. 2 years later came One Foot in the Grave, a memoir of his time as caretaker of the dead. Ambition burned brighter in 2004 when Chad established Spring Creek Book Company, self-publishing his works and those of like-minded authors. His stories, steeped in Mormon beliefs, painted vivid portraits of apocalyptic futures that sent chills down readers' spines. Yet financial success remained elusive. The company generated a mere $2,000 monthly, woefully inadequate for supporting his large family. Reluctantly, Chad returned to cemetery work while continuing to nurture his growing literary universe. Something changed in Chad during these years among the headstones. The boundary between fiction and reality began to blur in terrifying ways. He started claiming that near-death experiences had torn the veil between worlds, allowing him to perceive hidden truths. "I don't fictionalize any events," he would insist with unsettling conviction, eyes feverish with certainty. "I'm really not that creative. My torn veil allows information to be downloaded into my brain from the other side. The scenes I am shown are real events that will happen." His growing reputation earned him influence in certain Mormon circles. He became a regular contributor to a paid forum called Another Voice of Warning, where his apocalyptic prophecies fell on eager ears. While many authors explored end-time scenarios in fiction, Chad's visions were disturbingly real to him, and increasingly to his followers. Around 2006, friends and family noticed a darkness descending over Chad. His obsession with preparing for Doomsday intensified. By 2008, he claimed direct visions of Earth's final chapter. Earthquakes tearing apart continents, wars engulfing nations, destruction on scales biblical in proportion. His prophecies grew more detailed, more urgent, more frightening. Chad found kindred spirits in other apocalyptic authors. He published works by Julie Rowe, a self-proclaimed clairvoyant whose prophecies mirrored his own. Their partnership fueled their rise within the Mormon Doomsday Prepper community. Another author, Suzanne Freeman, initially worked with Chad but grew concerned as his beliefs veered dangerously from traditional Mormon doctrine. She severed their professional relationship in 2005, troubled by the path he was traveling. The voices in Chad's head grew louder, more insistent. After a particularly vivid vision of Utah's annihilation by earthquake, panic seized him. One voice, more commanding than others, whispered a single destination: Rexburg, Idaho. Driven by unseen forces and unshakable conviction, Chad prepared to uproot his family and flee to this supposed sanctuary. With Tammy and several of their children, they fled to Idaho, escaping an earthquake that existed only in his visions. Though the prophesied disaster never materialized, something about Rexburg held them there, as if destiny had marked this quiet town as the stage for what would come. Meanwhile, another soul was walking her own troubled path. Born Lori Cox in 1973, she too grew up embraced by Mormon traditions. Marriage came early for the beautiful young woman. At just 19, she wed her high school sweetheart. The union crumbled quickly, but Lori barely stumbled. This would merely be the opening chapter in her tumultuous romantic saga. 3 years later, she married again and welcomed a son named Colby into the world. Yet this marriage too dissolved within another 3 years. Resilient and resourceful, Lori built a life as a hairdresser, achieving enough success to compete in the Mrs. Texas beauty pageant in 2004. That same year, wedding bells rang once more as Lori married Joseph Anthony Ryan Jr., who lovingly adopted Colby. The couple soon welcomed a daughter, Tylee Ryan. But beneath the picture-perfect surface, darkness lurked. Colby revealed that Joseph had been inappropriately touching him, accusations that sparked a bitter divorce and vicious custody battle. Joseph ultimately lost all rights to the children. Lori's brother, Alex Cox, burned with protective fury for his sister. Violence came easily to him when family was threatened. After hearing about Joseph's alleged abuse, Alex viciously attacked him in 2007, an assault that earned him a 90-day jail sentence. Undeterred by her past failures, Lori dove into marriage again in 2006, this time to Leland Charles Anthony Vallow, known simply as Charles. The couple settled in Arizona, and in 2013, they opened their hearts further, adopting Charles's grandnephew Joshua, called JJ, whose parents' drug addictions had left him unable to thrive. Born with substances in his system and later diagnosed with autism, JJ required special care, but Lori and Charles embraced the challenge. Until his adoption, JJ had been lovingly raised by his grandparents, Kay and Larry Woodcock. Though heartbreaking, they believed the boy would flourish in a traditional family environment. When Lori and Charles temporarily relocated to Kauai, Hawaii, for business, JJ's grandparents maintained contact despite the painful distance. Eventually, the family returned to Arizona, seemingly settling into normalcy. Throughout these years, Lori remained devoted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, raising her children in the Mormon faith. But invisible to those around her, terrible thoughts were taking root in her mind, dark seeds that would sprout with frightening speed when she discovered the Standing in Holy Places series written by none other than Chad Daybell. In 2018, a shocking development shook Lori's world. Joseph Anthony Ryan, her bitter ex-husband, was found dead in his apartment. The official cause, cardiovascular disease. What appeared as natural causes to investigators carried an entirely different meaning for Lori, who had repeatedly confided to friends her desires to end Joseph's life. He told everybody that I was this lying, crazy Mormon, she would later say, voice trembling with righteous conviction. He got up in court and said all these horrible things about me. I was going to kill him like the scripture says, like Nephi killed, just to stop the pain and stop him coming after me and my children. The reference wasn't lost on those familiar with Mormon scripture. Nephi, a revered prophet, had killed an evil man named Laban. As Lori's grip on reality loosened, she began to see herself as a modern-day prophet, divinely justified in her hatred. Though Joseph had indeed died of natural causes, this coincidence only strengthened her dangerous delusions. In her increasingly disturbed mind, his death wasn't mere chance. It was celestial validation of her darkest impulses. By this time, Chad had carved out a space for himself on a Mormon podcast and forum called Preparing a People. There, he shared his beliefs, apocalyptic visions, and promoted his books, though he carefully watered down his most radical ideas, knowing they would alarm the mainstream church. I've had a couple near-death experiences, he would say in his measured, charismatic tone. It seems like I've been waiting 20 years for something to happen. I write all these novels and people ask, when's it going to start? He gestured dramatically at images of flooded temples, his voice quickening with excitement. Look at the Houston temple, probably 20 feet deep from the front fountain. North Korea's going nuts right now. Hurricane Irma is heading toward Florida. Fires are raging in California and Montana. It just feels like times are beginning. Meanwhile, Lori devoured Chad's apocalyptic books, each page feeding her growing obsession. Her hunger for these radical beliefs led her to other creators in the same sphere. Podcasts featuring Mormon and excommunicated Mormon extremists discussing near-death experiences and doomsday prophecies. Drawn deeper into this world, Lori, her friend Melanie Gibb, and a new acquaintance named Zulema Pastines decided to attend a Preparing the People event in St. George, Utah. There, Chad spoke with practiced humility. I'm honored to be part of this conference. I've recently released my autobiography, Living on the Edge of Heaven, where I share my 2 near-death experiences. I'll also discuss my upcoming novel about refugees from the West Coast after destruction strikes, and how we'll assist them physically and spiritually. Lori had made no secret of her desire to meet Chad, one of her favorite authors, but her friends failed to recognize the intensity of her fascination. When they finally met after his presentation, onlookers noted the unmistakably flirtatious energy between them. For Chad, suddenly approached by an attractive former beauty pageant contestant, the attention was intoxicating. They exchanged contact information, and Chad made his move with a shocking revelation. They had been married multiple times across several past lives. Though reincarnation wasn't part of mainstream Mormonism, it had existed in early church teachings, an esoteric belief that Chad embraced for its mystique. This talk of shared past lives created an immediate, powerful bond between them. Soon after, fortune favored their forbidden connection. While Lori's husband Charles Vallow was away on business, Chad happened to be in Arizona for his own work. Seizing the opportunity, Lori hosted a small religious gathering at her home, inviting Melanie Gibb and Chad. There, he mesmerized the women with his peculiar Mormon-adjacent teachings, convincing them he possessed higher knowledge. Those present later described the meeting between Chad and Lori in blunt terms. It was a pretty evident hookup. Their affair blossomed quickly, with neither making much effort to conceal it. They justified their relationship by insisting they were technically already married multiple times in past lives. Preparing a People began hosting regular podcasts featuring Chad, and on December 5, 2018, Lori joined him for an episode titled Time to Warrior Up. Though the recording has been lost, the title suggests themes connected to their end times beliefs. The pair appeared in several more episodes together, sometimes joined by their friend Melanie Gibb. In one partially recovered episode, the description reads, Melanie Gibb and Charles Vallow team up sharing how extreme challenges help them through miracles in the reality of our best friend and lover of our souls, Jesus Christ. In a chilling moment from that recording, Lori's voice rings with disturbing certainty. If you don't have joy, you haven't repented, Melanie. You're not having this joy. That was a huge clue for me. You were literally miserable. Those close to Lori noticed the alarming transformation. Her former sister-in-law, Annie Cushing, observed, there was a tectonic shift in her and she went over the edge. Even seeing these warning signs, the families of Lori and Chad couldn't grasp the terrible reality forming behind closed doors. A full-fledged cult was taking shape around Chad's Doomsday prophecies. They called themselves the Church of the Firstborn, with Chad as leader and Lori as his second-in-command. The inner circle included Lori's niece Melanie Boudreau, friend Melanie Gibb, brother Alex Cox, Zulema Pastines, and a few others. Alex, always protective of his sister, now served as the group's enforcer, eventually entering into a relationship with Zulema. As the group grew tighter, they became bolder. Rather than hiding their radical views that conflicted with Mormon doctrine, Lori and Melanie Gibb launched their own religious podcast. Chad delved deeper into reincarnation, claiming he had lived 31 past lives, some on different planets, while Lori had experienced 21 lives, mostly on Earth. When their timelines aligned, he insisted they always found each other and married. With growing conviction, Chad declared himself the reincarnation of James the Less, one of Jesus' disciples. Lori, he proclaimed, had been both the great-grandmother of Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet, and the wife of Moroni, another Mormon prophet. According to Chad, they had undergone multiple life probations, a concept some reincarnation-believing Mormons hold as necessary for spiritual purification. Chad and Lori wielded their past marriages as divine permission for their affair, justifying their relationship to their growing circle of followers. When Melanie Gibb suggested the straightforward solution, leave their current spouses, Lori refused, claiming they were forbidden by mysterious orders from the other side of the void, Chad's favorite term for the supernatural source of his writing abilities. Beyond reincarnation, the pair developed a chilling system for categorizing humanity. They placed people on a spectrum from light to dark, measuring their proximity to God or Satan. Those on the darkest end were possessed by evil spirits, but remained salvageable. 7 women in the group, calling themselves the 7 Gatherers, conducted prayer rituals over Zoom to purify those they'd labeled as dark. But there existed a state beyond possession, a classification that carried a death sentence. These unfortunates were labeled zombies, souls beyond salvation. For zombies, Chad and Lori taught, death was the only release from their demonic imprisonment. The couple also ranked people by their vibrations, not a measure of good versus evil, but of prophetic potential. Those with higher vibrations possessed greater spiritual powers. Some, they claimed, could even create portals to communicate across vast distances or travel between worlds. Chad, forever guided from beyond the void, delivered a terrifying prophecy to his followers. The world would end on July 22, 2020. Lori, now embracing her self-proclaimed identity as a goddess, declared that she and Chad would lead 144,000 chosen survivors after the apocalypse, a number significant in both Mormon and Jehovah's Witness traditions. In her twisted divinity, Lori placed herself above earthly laws and morality, proudly announcing to cult members that she wouldn't be held responsible for anything she did on Earth. Though their beliefs retained shadows of Mormon fundamentalism, they had mutated into something unrecognizable, a dangerous perversion of faith. Yet cult members still considered themselves devout Mormons, simply of a higher grade with special knowledge hidden from ordinary followers. Lori's hatred, once directed at her ex-husband Joseph, now turned toward Charles Vallow. In January 2019, she began accusing him of infidelity. By February, she coldly informed Charles that she no longer cared about him or their adopted son JJ. With frightening conviction, she told Charles he was possessed by an evil spirit named Ned Schneider, and that she, the chosen one, was destined to shepherd the 144,000 through the coming apocalypse. The world is ending in July 2020, she warned him, eyes burning with terrifying certainty. I will kill you if you get in the way of my work. During this time, Chad was discovered to have flown to Arizona to visit her. Charles began receiving death threats. His truck was stolen. Approximately $35,000 vanished from their joint bank account. Desperate and afraid, Charles sought a protection order against Lori, but withdrew it a month later, clinging to hope that their marriage might be salvaged despite the death threats. Shaken to his core, Charles quietly changed his life insurance policy, designating his sister, not Lori, as beneficiary should he die. Lori remained unaware of this change. Charles pleaded with Lori to seek mental health treatment at a facility called Community Bridges. Surprisingly, she agreed. Even more surprising and deeply troubling was that professionals found her to be in a completely sound state of mind and medically cleared her. Behind closed doors, Lori's messages to her brother Alex echoed what she told Charles, referring to her husband as either Ned or Hiplos, another spirit she claimed possessed him. Meanwhile, Chad's internet searches grew increasingly disturbing, including Ned Schneider, Louisiana, obituary 1997. Soon, Lori declared that Charles had crossed the final threshold. He was now a zombie. According to their cult's beliefs, he was beyond all help. Only death could save him now. While those outside the cult saw Charles as entirely normal, the group accepted Lori's proclamation as gospel truth and began praying for his death. Then, without warning, Lori vanished for 58 days without contacting Charles. Fearing for his family's safety, Charles moved himself and the children back to Texas, seeking the protection of proximity to JJ's grandparents, the Woodcocks. Investigation later revealed that during her mysterious absence, Lori had retreated to Hawaii, meeting repeatedly with Chad. Eventually, Lori returned, moving to Texas with Charles. Soon after, the couple relocated back to Arizona together. But their fragile peace shattered when Charles discovered her affair with Chad. Confronting her, Charles threatened to expose everything to Chad's wife, Tammy. I'll tell her exactly what's happening between you two, he warned. Charles sent an email to Tammy revealing the affair. She read it, deleted it, and blocked him. Undeterred, Charles vowed to tell Tammy in person, a line Lori wouldn't allow him to cross. Charles had grown increasingly worried about JJ's welfare. The autism-diagnosed child required consistent routine care, and Lori had become disturbingly detached. He worried about Tylee too, but having no legal claim as her biological father or adoptive parent, his hands were tied. On July 11, 2019, Charles arrived at Lori's home to pick up JJ. Instead of Lori, he found her brother and fellow cult member, Alex Cox, waiting. Alex confronted Charles with all of Lori's wild accusations. A scuffle erupted. In the chaos, Tylee grabbed JJ and fled the house to safety. Then came the gunshot. Alex pulled his weapon and fired, ending Charles's life on the spot. When police arrived, Alex and Lori spun a calculated tale. Charles, enraged over their impending divorce, had stormed in with violent intentions. Alex claimed he fired purely in self-defense. With neither child witnessing the actual shooting, investigators had only Lori and Alex's testimony. No charges were pressed. The officers departed, noting in their report Lori's disturbing lack of emotion, completely unmoved by her husband's violent death. While Alex underwent questioning, neighbors heard music blasting from Lori's home. She was hosting a pool party mere hours after her husband's murder. Later, Alex confided in Zulema that he felt no remorse whatsoever. After all, he explained, he had only killed a zombie. Days after Charles's death, Chad sent Lori a romantic story in a series of text messages. In it, he detailed their supposed past lives together as James and Elena, vividly describing their passionate sexual encounters. Shortly after Charles was cremated, Chad flew to Arizona to be with Lori. Emboldened by their successful elimination of obstacles, Alex took out a $21,000 loan, supposedly for medical reasons. No medical treatment records exist from this period, but what investigators did discover was chilling. He purchased 46 different firearms with the money. Just 1 month after Charles's murder, Lori, Alex, and Lori's niece Melanie decided to relocate to Rexburg, Idaho with Lori's children. On her rental application, Lori claimed they were moving so Tylee could attend BYU, Idaho. In reality, Tylee never enrolled. The true purpose of their relocation was obvious: to be closer to Chad. Before leaving Arizona, Lori sold JJ's service dog and many of their belongings, troubling signs of what was to come. Neighbors in their new Idaho community quickly noticed Lori's disturbing treatment of JJ. The autistic child was frequently left outside unattended for hours. When confronted, Lori coldly dismissed concerns, telling neighbors JJ was merely her niece's drug baby, causing further confusion and alarm. As their twisted beliefs intensified, Lori and Chad became convinced, or found it convenient to believe, that Lori's children, Tylee and JJ, were possessed. Soon, they declared to the cult that both children had become zombies. Chad ominously told followers that JJ specifically wouldn't live much longer, but would be reincarnated as Lori's son Colby's next child. Lori, Chad, and Alex exchanged disturbing text messages about the children's supposed possessions and their perfectly orchestrated plan to deal with them. They stopped referring to the children by name, using only the letter Z instead, signifying that they viewed Tylee and JJ as zombies, no longer even human. At 16, Tylee hadn't enrolled in a new high school in Idaho, making her virtually invisible to anyone outside the family. The last confirmed sighting of her was in September 2019 during a family trip to Yellowstone National Park with Lori, Alex, and JJ. Photos from that day show everyone smiling, the children blissfully unaware of the horror their mother and uncle were plotting. The day after their Yellowstone outing, Alex visited Lori's home in the middle of the night. Though the exact details remain unknown, Tylee would never be seen again. The following morning, Alex drove to Chad's property. There, they attempted to dismember Tylee's body with a pickaxe, but only managed to sever her hands. They burned her remains beyond recognition, leaving investigators with little evidence of what truly happened to her. Then, they unceremoniously buried her in a shallow grave on Chad's property. JJ continued living his disrupted life for a few more weeks, still frequently abandoned outside for hours at a time. A 7-year-old autistic child left to fend for himself while his mother's apocalyptic delusions deepened. On September 17, 2019, a doorbell camera captured the last video evidence of JJ's existence. Footage of the 7-year-old playing outside, oblivious to his fate. According to school records, he attended Rexburg Kennedy Elementary School for the final time on September 20th. 2 days later, JJ was seen alive for the last time by members of the cult. Melanie Gibb and her boyfriend David Warwick had come to stay overnight at Lori's home. The women planned to record a podcast together. That evening, they witnessed Alex carrying a sleeping JJ upstairs to his bedroom. The next morning, Melanie and David awoke to find JJ mysteriously absent. He was misbehaving, Lori explained with chilling casualness. Alex came to pick him up and take him somewhere. The horrifying truth would later emerge. Alex had suffocated JJ to death with plastic and duct tape over his mouth that morning. He had indeed taken JJ somewhere, to Chad's property to be buried. Lori apparently joined them for this grim task. Chad, maintaining an air of disturbing normalcy, texted his wife Tammy with a manufactured excuse for why he was digging in their yard. in case questions arose later. He claimed he had shot a raccoon that was unusually active in daylight and was burying it in what they called their pet cemetery, while Tylee had been brutally mutilated and discarded with little respect. Simply thrown into a shallow hole with dirt piled on top, JJ was treated with more care. For reasons unknown, his body was carefully wrapped in plastic and buried beneath both rocks and wooden planks. Perhaps the group felt more affection for him, or more likely, they had learned from their sloppy disposal of Tylee and wanted to better conceal their crime. What they failed to hide, however, were Alex's fingerprints and Lori's hair, both of which remained on the plastic wrapping, silent witnesses to their monstrous deed. That day, JJ was marked absent from school with no explanation. The following day, Lori called the school, coolly informing them she would be homeschooling JJ from now on. Meanwhile, she continued collecting Social Security benefits tied to the deaths of both children's fathers. About a month after the murders, Lori made a calculated move to create evidence that her children were still alive. She accessed Tylee's Venmo account and sent 2 payments to Tylee's older brother, Colby. Growing worried about his sister's silence, Colby reached out via text. He received responses claiming Tylee was fine but too busy to talk. His repeated calls went unanswered, deepening his concern. Desperate to reach his siblings, Colby posted a heartbreaking message on Facebook in September. "I pray for you both every day. I always have. I need to ask, how is this possible? You both mean so much to me. My heart is broken over all of this. I'm gonna speak with our mom. I need to know what's happening with you both. Just know I love you with all my heart. I'm here to stand up for you. I won't leave no matter how hard this gets. I love you, Ty and JJ." For weeks, no one received clear answers about the children's whereabouts. Instead, family members and friends encountered a web of contradictions about where they were and why they couldn't be reached. Fear for their safety grew with each passing day. Meanwhile, Lori's niece Melanie Boudreau had become deeply entangled in the cult. She had been urging her husband Brandon to stockpile food for the impending apocalypse, alarming him with her increasingly radical beliefs. His concerns were validated when, around the time Tylee and JJ vanished, Melanie abruptly announced she wanted a divorce. "I was completely blindsided," Brandon later said, attributing the sudden change to his wife's involvement in her aunt's crazy cult. That October, as Brandon drove home one day, a Jeep sped past him. The driver fired shots that missed his head by inches before speeding away. Brandon, having spent time around various cult members, recognized the vehicle as one Tylee had been driving. He managed to note the license plate and reported it to police, who confirmed the car was registered to the late Charles Vallow. The pieces of the deadly puzzle clicked into place for Brandon. Charles's supposed self-defense killing, the missing children, now an attempt on his own life. This murderous cult had arrived at his doorstep. Brandon realized with chilling clarity that since Melanie now viewed him as an obstacle, just as Charles, Tylee, and JJ had been, he was likely the next target on their list. Brandon later filed court documents stating the attempt on his life was likely orchestrated by Alex Cox, the cult enforcer, probably targeting his life insurance. Most disturbing, he alleged Melanie was almost certainly aware of what had truly happened to Tylee and JJ. Police took these accusations seriously. Tracing Alex Cox's cell phone data, they discovered damning evidence. Alex had searched for directions to Brandon's home and was in the vicinity hours before the shooting. He had also exchanged multiple calls with Lori throughout the day. Perhaps most incriminating, Lori herself had Googled information about the shooting shortly after it occurred, apparently seeking confirmation of whether Brandon had survived. Following the failed assassination attempt, Chad bestowed upon Alex what's called a patriarchal blessing, a sacred Mormon ritual he had no authority to perform within the LDS Church. In a recording later leaked to investigators, Chad's voice resonates with chilling reverence. "We are going to give Alex Lamar Cox a patriarchal blessing," Chad intoned solemnly. "Alexander Lamar Cox, on this special day I lay my hands upon your head. As part of the Church of the Firstborn that you have earned the privilege to be a member of, I see you on the third creation as a valiant warrior fighting for truth and righteousness. always seeking to do what is right. Powerful goddesses were needed to be protected, and you were selected to help protect your sister. You've helped her in numerous probations as a defender. The blessing essentially canonized Alex's murderous actions as divine service, calling him both a prophet and a hero with a bright future ahead as a messenger of the Lord. Until this point, nearly all the murders and attempted murders had targeted Lori's family members. That was about to change. Chad had grown weary of his marriage to Tammy, with all his focus now devoted to Lori. His new lover was already browsing wedding rings online, utterly convinced Tammy wouldn't be around to bother her much longer. Chad told Lori that Tammy was possessed by a spirit named Viola, mirroring his claims about Charles being possessed by Ned. Like the others before her, Chad declared Tammy a zombie, effectively marking her for death in the eyes of the entire cult. But unlike previous victims, Chad didn't keep these dark pronouncements within the cult's inner circle. Speaking to his neighbors Todd and Alice Gilbert, Chad casually mentioned he'd had a vision that Tammy would die before her 50th birthday. On October 9th, Alex Cox embarked on his deadly mission, staking out Chad and Tammy's house. His Google searches betrayed his meticulous planning, researching what damage a Grendel round from an AR-15 would do to a Dodge Dakota, the model of car Tammy owned. Having failed in his attempt to shoot Brandon while driving just a week earlier, he was determined not to make the same mistake twice. Wearing a mask, Alex approached Tammy outside her home and fired multiple times with his AR-15. Either every shot missed or the gun malfunctioned, no damage was done. Tammy, misinterpreting the attack, believed it was merely a prank with a paintball gun. Nevertheless, she reported the incident to police. The night of Tammy's driveway attack, Zulema Pastines was with Lori and Melanie conducting their usual prayers for the possessed. In the middle of their ritual, Lori abruptly answered her phone. After a brief conversation, she erupted in fury, calling the person on the line an idiot, a moron, and stupid before hanging up. Turning to the group, she seethed, "Idiot can't do anything by himself," before resuming their prayer session as if nothing had happened. 10 days later, Alex returned to Tammy's home to finish the job. This time, he asphyxiated her in her own bedroom. Chad later discovered Tammy dead in their home, claiming she had died of natural causes. He told authorities she had been suffering from a terrible cough the night before and must have died in her sleep. He added that she had been experiencing low blood pressure, seizures, and negative reactions to medication leading up to her death, claims unsupported by any medical records. The supposed natural death of Tammy Daybell removed the final obstacle in Chad and Lori's twisted romance. Their path to unholy matrimony was now clear, paved with the bodies of those they had deemed zombies in their apocalyptic delusion. 3 days after Tammy's death, her funeral was hastily arranged in Utah. Alice Gilbert, their neighbor, later remarked how suspiciously quick the arrangements had been, almost as if they had been planned in advance. Even more troubling was Chad's demeanor. Unlike Tammy's grieving children, he showed little genuine emotion. Observers noted he seemed to be forcing tears that wouldn't come, a performance of grief rather than its reality. During the very funeral service, Chad spoke callously about his deceased wife, claiming she had suffered from depression and had been very lazy, making her a hard person to live with. Meanwhile, back at home, Lori was already Googling wedding dresses that same day. Chad wasted no time cashing out several life insurance policies connected to Tammy, collecting over $430,000. When authorities suggested an autopsy, Chad adamantly refused, and since everything appeared to be from natural causes, the coroner simply accepted his decision. Just 1 day after burying his wife, Chad was introducing Lori to his children. A week later, he told neighbors Todd and Alice that he had met the woman he was going to marry. Days after that, he brought Lori to meet them. Alice described the encounter as very awkward, noting that Chad was laughing, happy, and far more affectionate with Lori than he had ever been with Tammy, all while his wife's funeral had been less than 2 weeks prior. For the first time, Chad hinted at what had happened to Tylee, telling the neighbors that Lori had also lost someone recently, a daughter. With his rushed remarriage drawing suspicion, Chad approached Tammy's sister, Samantha Gwilliam, with an astonishing tale, Tammy's ghost had appeared to him at the cemetery and told him to move on. He added that he and Lori would be empty nesters, as Lori had no kids. A chilling statement when Tylee and JJ weren't yet known to be dead or even officially missing. By November, flush with life insurance money, Chad and Lori boarded a plane to Hawaii to get married. Abandoning his children without explanation, Chad didn't inform anyone he was leaving. The couple wed in a lavish Hawaiian ceremony, with Chad's own mother learning of the marriage long after it had taken place. On November 26th, the Woodcocks, JJ's grandparents who had previously cared for him, grew desperate after repeated denials of access to the boy. They contacted police to perform a welfare check at Lori's Idaho home. When officers arrived, they found Chad and Alex behaving suspiciously. Alex, unaware that JJ's grandmother had requested the check, told police JJ was with his grandmother. A blatant contradiction. Chad compounded the suspicion by claiming he was merely Alex's friend and barely knew Lori. When police contacted Lori, she stated JJ was staying with Melanie Gibb in Arizona. Police then reached out to Melanie, who admitted she hadn't seen JJ in months. Realizing authorities were closing in, Lori and Alex frantically packed a truck that night, observed by neighbors. The following day, when police and FBI returned to search the home, they found it completely abandoned. Chad and Lori had fled on the earliest flight back to Hawaii, apparently believing they could evade justice by hiding in the islands, seemingly forgetting Hawaii remained part of the United States. Using their newfound wealth, they moved into a gated community on Kauai. On their housing application forms, both marked that they had no children. Back in Idaho, police secured a warrant to locate the Jeep used in the shooting attempt on Brandon Boudreaux months earlier in Arizona. Meanwhile, Melanie Gibb finally turned against Chad and Lori, informing police that both had separately contacted her, urging her to lie and tell authorities JJ was with her. While searching for JJ, investigators made another disturbing discovery. Lori's daughter Tylee was also missing. The investigation intensified as police worked to locate the couple and the missing children. Authorities also decided to reinvestigate Tammy's death. They ordered her body exhumed and subjected to a proper autopsy. The results confirmed their worst suspicions. Tammy had been asphyxiated. Her death was officially reclassified as homicide. The walls were beginning to close in on Chad and Lori's blood-soaked fantasy world. Their Church of the Firstborn had collected its final sacrifices, but justice was now on their trail. Zulema returned home to find Alex on the phone with Lori and Chad, discussing Tammy's body being exhumed. Confused, she confronted Alex. Why would an autopsy be necessary if Tammy had died naturally? She pressed him. Did you have anything to do with her death? Though Alex initially denied involvement, he grew uncharacteristically quiet. A terrible realization seemed to dawn on him. Breaking his silence, he confided to Zulema. I think I am being their fall guy. Fall guy for what? She asked, but Alex refused to answer. The next day, Alex Cox died in the home he shared with Zulema. Medical examiners later confirmed his death resulted from high blood pressure and blood clots. A strangely convenient end for the cult's enforcer. In December, police officially classified Tylee and JJ as missing persons. They publicly linked the disappearances to Tammy Daybell's death and named Lori and Chad as persons of interest. The announcement ignited a media frenzy, particularly given the couple's prominence in Mormon Doomsday prepper circles. The Woodcocks, JJ's grandparents, leveraged this media attention, pleading for public assistance in finding the children. Chad's own brother Matt begged the couple to return the children. The Woodcocks posted a $20,000 reward for information leading to the children's whereabouts. Finally, in January, authorities located Chad and Lori in Hawaii. Police served them with a court order requiring them to physically produce Tylee and JJ to either the Department of Welfare or Idaho Police within 5 days. Officers seized their rental car and searched their home in the gated community. Alarmingly, they discovered Tylee's debit card and JJ's iPad, but no sign the children had ever been there. When confronted by reporters demanding to know the children's whereabouts, the couple remained stubbornly silent. I just can't comment, Chad said evasively. We just have to wait for the legal process to work. Weeks later, police discovered a storage locker in Rexburg that Lori had rented but abandoned. Inside lay a heartbreaking collection of Tylee and JJ's belongings. Photos, bicycles, clothing, apparently hastily stashed before the couple fled to Hawaii. Security footage captured Lori and Alex throwing items into storage shortly before their departure. On February 20th, 2020, Lori was formally arrested in Hawaii. Weeks later, she was extradited to Idaho to face 2 felony charges of desertion and non-support of dependent children, along with several misdemeanors. Her bail was initially set at a staggering $5 million before being reduced to $1 million after extradition. Despite her efforts to further lower the amount, no local bond companies would work with her. Following Lori's arrest, a defeated Chad returned to Idaho. In desperation, he approached neighbors, asking them to put up their home as collateral for Lori's bond, claiming Jesus told them this was the way to go. They refused. When Alice confronted him about the children, particularly how he had previously mentioned Lori's daughter was dead, Chad dismissed it as simply a custody issue. Speaking of Tylee notably in past tense, he said, "She didn't like people and didn't like me either." Chad's luck soon ran out. Police, guided by Alex Cox's phone location history, searched Chad's property, focusing on his so-called pet cemetery. There, they discovered multiple unmarked shallow graves. Panicked, Chad called Lori in jail to warn her about the unfolding situation. As officers zeroed in on the burial sites, he attempted to distract them before trying to flee in his car. Police pursued and captured him, arresting him for obstruction and concealment of evidence. Like Lori, his bail was set at $1 million. The Woodcocks and Charles Ryan's families received the devastating confirmation they had feared. Human remains found on Chad's property were indeed Tylee and JJ. Police later noted that Alex's fingerprints and Lori's hair were found in JJ's grave. Soon after, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints officially excommunicated Chad Daybell, citing his odd religious teachings branded as a doomsday cult as the reason. Lori's charges were amended. Desertion counts dropped in favor of obstruction or concealment of evidence now that the bodies had been found. Her bond was lowered to $150,000, though Chad's remained unchanged. A year passed until May 2021, when Chad and Lori were finally indicted on charges of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder for the deaths of the children and grand theft related to stealing their Social Security benefits. Chad faced additional fraud charges connected to Tammy's life insurance. Lori received one more charge: conspiracy to commit first-degree murder for the death of her husband Charles Vallow. Investigators determined there wasn't enough evidence to link Chad directly to Charles's murder. The deadly prophecies of the self-proclaimed prophets had come to a horrifying conclusion, not in the apocalypse they had preached, but in the destruction of innocent lives sacrificed at the altar of their delusions. In September 2021, Chad Daybell's children stunned the world by publicly declaring their father's innocence. They claimed Lori Vallow had manipulated him and deceived him in the worst, most deadly way possible. Despite the children's bodies being found on his property, his daughter Emma insisted, "My father needs someone to be a voice for him, to let people know what's real, what we know." As the judicial process unfolded, Lori's case hit unexpected delays. Her bizarre religious beliefs became a central issue when she was deemed incompetent and unfit to stand trial. After months of mental health treatment in April 2022, she was finally declared competent to proceed. However, her attorneys filed motion after motion, attempting to undermine this finding. By November, courts once again confirmed her competency. Around this time, Lori faced an additional indictment, one count of first-degree premeditated murder for the attempted shooting of Brandon Boudreaux. Prosecutors alleged she had hoped to gain access to his life insurance money through her niece, another loyal cult member. Predictably, both Lori and Chad pleaded not guilty to all charges. In March 2023, at Chad's request, their cases were separated. His attorneys explained he had waived his right to a speedy trial, needing more time to review DNA evidence. They also cited mutually antagonistic defense strategies as reason for the split. Since Lori hadn't requested the same delay, Her trial proceeded as scheduled. Prosecutors assembled dozens of witnesses who would testify that the couple had directly or indirectly expressed plans to eliminate Lori's children, removing obstacles to their relationship while securing financial gain. The prosecution strategy centered on exposing the couple's disturbing belief system of lights, darks, and zombies that had justified the killings in their twisted minds. The death penalty was removed as a possibility in Lori's case when newly discovered DNA evidence emerged too close to trial, making it inadmissible in court. Her trial officially began in April 2023 in Boise, Idaho. In a telling strategic choice, Lori didn't testify, and her defense called no witnesses whatsoever. The prosecution, meanwhile, brought approximately 60 different people to testify against her. Though Alex Cox had clearly been the direct murderer, prosecutors meticulously demonstrated how Lori had manipulated her vulnerable brother into becoming her instrument of death. Lori's own sister testified that Alex had suffered brain damage from a car accident, leaving him with the decision-making level of a teenager at best. Zulema added that Alex had been completely under Chad and Lori's control, convinced he was a reincarnated warrior of God, brought to Earth solely to protect Lori. Attempting to counter this narrative, Lori's attorney Jim Archibald argued that Lori herself had been under Chad's control all along. On May 12, 2023, the jury reached its verdict. Lori Vallow was guilty on all charges. She received 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole for the murders of Tylee and JJ and the conspiracy to murder Tammy Daybell, plus additional fines for grand theft. The judge delivered a scathing assessment, declaring that Lori had chosen the most evil and destructive path possible, descending down a bizarre religious rabbit hole to murder innocent children who obstructed her romantic life and financial ambitions. When given the opportunity to address the court, Lori delivered a chilling statement that revealed her continued detachment from reality. Speaking with eerie calmness, she claimed to communicate regularly with Jesus, Tammy, Tylee, and JJ. Jesus Christ knows that no one was murdered in this case, she insisted, her voice steady. Accidental deaths happen. Suicides happen. Fatal side effects from medications happen. Jesus knows me and Jesus understands me. Her delusion unbroken, she continued. I mourn with all of you who mourn my children and me. I know for a fact that my children are happy and busy in the spirit world. Because of my communications with my friend Tammy Daybell, I know that she is also very happy and extremely busy. With disturbing serenity, she described supposed visits from her murdered children. Tylee has visited me. She is happy and very busy. Tylee is free now from all the pains of her life. The first time JJ visited me after he passed away, he put his arm around me and said, "You didn't do anything wrong, Mom. I love you and I know you loved me every minute of my life." He is busy, he is engaged, he has jobs that he does there, and he is happy where he is. Her final words echoed with the same apocalyptic fervor that had driven her to such horrific acts. I look forward to the day when we are all reunited, and I too will rest with them in the arms of my Jesus. The saga of the Doomsday couple had reached its conclusion, not with the world-ending cataclysm they had prophesied, but with justice for their innocent victims. As Chad awaited his own trial, the dark shadow of their twisted prophecies had finally been brought into the light of truth. Meanwhile, Chad faced grave consequences for delaying his case. He remained eligible for the death penalty under the new evidence. His lawyers filed 3 separate motions attempting to remove this possibility, arguing that Lori had manipulated Chad through emotional and sexual control. They insisted he was less culpable than Lori, who had escaped capital punishment. All motions were rejected. Chad's trial began on April 10, 2024. Prosecutors portrayed him as a man motivated by sex, money, and power, who viewed his wife and Lori's children as obstacles to his destiny. His attorney, John Pryor, countered that Chad was merely a poor, pious man lured into an inappropriate relationship with Lori, who convinced him he was her divinely appointed protector. Desperate for legal loopholes, Chad's defense argued his indictment incorrectly listed JJ's death as occurring on September 8th or 9th, when it technically happened on the 22nd or 23rd. They attempted to use this minor discrepancy to have all charges dismissed. The judge ruled this clerical error insufficient grounds for acquittal. 2 of Chad's children, Emma and Garth, testified on his behalf, claiming their mother had indeed suffered health problems and tired easily. However, Tammy's work colleagues contradicted this, describing her as healthy and energetic until the day they last saw her. Tammy's sister likewise testified she had never mentioned health issues and appeared perfectly well. Chad never took the stand in his own defense. As prosecutors explained his strange cult beliefs to the court, his attorney acknowledged these beliefs but insisted Lori and Alex were the true aggressors. Lori motivated by greed, manipulating Chad throughout. He even suggested Chad would likely have been her next victim. The jury remained unconvinced. They found Chad guilty of both first-degree murder and conspiracy in the deaths of Tammy, Tylee, and JJ, plus grand theft related to the children's Social Security benefits and Tammy's life insurance. Larry Woodcock, JJ's grandfather, responded to the verdict with somber reflection. What did they accomplish? Nothing. What did they do? They destroyed families. On June 1, 2024, Chad was formally sentenced to death. He also received multiple 15-year sentences to run consecutively and was ordered to pay restitution of approximately $430,000, the amount he had collected from Tammy's life insurance. Tammy's family, Chad's siblings, the Boudreaux family, and the Cox family issued statements expressing relief that the trials had finally concluded. They praised the diligent work of police, prosecutors, judges, and jurors for bringing the case to its conclusion.